If you're going to form a business, treat it like a business. You can make missteps. Everybody does. But setting the good foundation.
Yes.
I'm all about foundation.
You have to have the strong foundation. That's just like building a house. Like you everything else will come, on top of that as you're building, but you have to have that foundation.
Exactly.
Hey out there, and welcome back to another episode of Bosses of the Valley. I'm your host, Cherie, and join me today as I introduce Stephanie Fierro. She is an attorney here at Keller Rohrback. Hey, Stephanie.
Hi, Cherie.
So I also wanted to mention today is going to be a special segment because I wanted to bring in, an expert to talk about the entity formations, why they're important, LLCs, and the things that can be very confusing if you're looking online and you're trying to do research and figure out what is the, best way to set up your business. So we're going to dive in and we're going to get started. So thank you so much for letting us into your space. I'm super excited. And I just want to share really quick how I found you. So I was doing my research. I'm very particular, when just kind of seeking out, who I want to interview and what, I feel like they can offer to the audience and people who just want to get started with setting up a business or if they want to elevate themselves in a leadership role. So, but I was on the community pages. I'm very involved on like Facebook and different community pages. And I saw your name come up a couple of times. There was a couple of people that had tagged your name and I was like, I have to research her. So I pulled it up. And once I started doing the research, instantly I have to tell you that your picture, I was like, I love her picture. I was like, she just looks like such a boss woman. I love it. And so you just had like a really nice smile and presence to yourself. And so I reached out and I appreciate you just kind of giving me the opportunity to explain, what Bosses of the Valley is and why I chose to seek you out.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for reaching out to me. I'm excited about doing this with you.
So we're going to jump right into it. And I just have some questions and just wanted to see if you could give, just the best answers that you could give that explain it as simple as possible for people out there who are just very confused with what's online or they just don't know where to begin with setting up a business. So.
Fair enough. I'll try my best.
All right. You got this. Understanding business formation. So that's going to be our first topic. What are the key factors a business owner should consider when choosing the right business structure?
Okay. So there's a lot of things that need to be thought of when you're thinking about what type of entity you want to form. Those include things like the number of owners that you plan to have, what management structure do you want, where do you plan to do business, where do you want to form your entity, and then with respect to where you're going to do business, what is the business? What exactly is the business that you're going to offer to the community, and why is that important? Taxation, what type of taxation you want, and how are you going to raise money? Like those are all things that will influence what type of entity you're going to ultimately land on.
Okay. And there's just a lot that goes with that. And I think that I know we'll get into this. I know that we'll definitely get into this, but I know that I think that people think there's one type of formation when setting up a business. And so do you ever see in, your expertise, your field, where people are setting up the wrong types of formations for their business?
That's a little unusual. I wouldn't say that happens a lot, but there are missteps that people make when setting up an entity that can have long-lasting impacts. Okay, one of the most important things I think is really taking it seriously and considering two equally important, but potentially diametrically opposed things. Planning for success, right? And if you are successful, what does that mean for your growth? Is the entity that you've chosen going to allow you to grow in the way that you expect? Is it going to entice maybe some of the investors that you want based on the entity that you've chosen? And the other thing that people sometimes fail to consider is planning for things to not go so smoothly.
Exactly.
Especially when you've decided to start a company with another person.
Okay. Yes. Oh, that's actually going to be another question down the line. So that's really good to know. That's what's like, there's so much to it. And I just don't think that I think it's just really confusing for people out there. I know, especially for myself. Now, I'm a person who does like to research. So I've tried to understand a lot of it, and then it brings you to another question and another question and another question. And I think it can get pretty overwhelming. But for the most part, I'm like, there is more than one way to do it. And I think a lot of the times, from at least from what I see, just online, people are very excited, and they're saying, hey, I have this business and I just set up an LLC. And I think they think it's just one way, and it's like there's so much more to it. So
there is so much more. I will, in fairness, though, LLCs are the most popular form of entity. So it would not be an unusual place to land. And we can talk, I'm sure we're going to talk about kind of why LLCs are so popular and the things that they offer to people and what makes them a good choice in a lot of circumstances. And so that's something that I think people sometimes jump into without necessarily considering it. But it's when I'm talking to clients, one of the things that I like to make sure that they understand is it can be a very deep rabbit hole. And like you said, you start researching it and you're like, oh, now I have to think about that question.
Yes.
Now I have to think about that question. And yes, we do have to consider all of those things. But the goal is to not allow my clients to be overwhelmed by that, to help them and guide them through that process. But there are some good resources that people can take advantage of, because when you're forming an entity, especially for the entrepreneurs out there that are starting at zero, the thought of hiring an attorney can be a little overwhelming. Because it is an expense, and setting up an entity is an expense, whether you hire an attorney or not. And so calculating out what is it really going to cost me to get my company positioned for growth.
yeah, I like that. There's just so much to it. So let's start out with just getting to know a little bit more about you. So I just wanted to know, how did you, get into the business of wanting to be an attorney, and then where you are today and how you chose this specific, field that you're in?
So I actually was going to school to be a teacher. And as much as I thought I really wanted to be a teacher, I was not engaged by the coursework, and I was really struggling in school and trying to kind of find my place. But educating people was definitely something that was appealing to me. And so it was actually the influence of my family, my husband in particular, who encouraged me to think about a career in the law. And probably too many episodes of Law and Order that made it seem
That'll do it.
seem very appealing. It was one of those things I watched a lot of and really enjoyed. And so I thought, okay, why not? And I ended up changing my major and really succeeded with the coursework. Found it very interesting and very appealing. And then I ended up doing so well in my coursework that I was offered a full merit scholarship to law school. And so it really felt like I had found what I was supposed to do. And then the way that I landed in transactional law with business transactions and estate planning was, I think, in part that educational piece. I work with clients every day, and I work to teach them about the choices that they're going to make and the things that they want to build, whether it's a business or an estate plan. And so I kind of still get to hold on to that.
Oh, that's amazing, because you actually are doing something that you went to school for. And I know that for a lot of people that can change. Yeah. You go to school for one thing and then you want to change it, and it just worked out for you and you have a passion for it. So how long have you been being an attorney in the field that you work for?
I have been licensed now since 2006. So quite some time, the better part of 20 years, if you can believe it. I can't believe it. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to believe it, but it's been a long time. And so it's something that you develop so much knowledge over that 20-year period that I'm a very different person and practitioner than I was when I first started, but I'm still me. And so it's nice to be able to have that background and all of those years of experience behind me.
Yes. See, I like experts. This is why I like experts. So thank you, for just keeping it going. And that is quite a while. And, you just become knowledgeable. And again, I think it's, for me personally, it's easier when it's your passion and you just want to soak up more and more knowledge about it. So yes, absolutely. I appreciate it. So back on understanding the business formations, can you explain the primary differences between the partnerships, like the different kind, the LLCs?
Okay.
See, I'm still learning too.
That's okay. That's okay. That's why you hire an advisor to help walk you through the process. So there are a couple of different choices that you can make, or business structures, some of which are officially entities and some of which are not. So like a sole proprietorship, for example, it's not technically an entity. It's an unincorporated, unformed business structure where you have a single owner and they operate their business as themselves. Now, they might get a trade name so that they have a company name or what have you, but there's no official entity around that. The other options include an LLC, some form of partnership. Then you also have a corporation. And with the corporation, you have these options, and really with an LLC as well, the S Corp option. And it's a bit of a misnomer, right? It has corporation in the name,
yes,
but it in and of itself is not an entity type. Okay. S Corp is not an entity type. It's a tax election. So you can have an LLC that's taxed as an S Corp, or you can have a corporation that's taxed as an S Corp. A straight C Corp is a corporation taxed as a C corporation. So they're different subchapters of the tax code. And it changes the structure a bit based on who can be an owner of an S Corp, depending on whether you've made that election.
Okay, so when someone out there is choosing, this is going to form along more of a structure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there one that is more common, or does that just depend on the type of business that someone has or is setting up, or that you see?
So it depending on the type of business, you might see a different type of structure in different markets. Like, for example, a consultant or a trainer of some kind, they may just be perfectly fine to operate as a sole proprietor.
Okay.
Whereas if you're going to be offering products or services to a wide variety of people or different businesses, the LLC structure is a very common place for people to land. It's a very popular business structure. Because one of the things that an LLC offers that a sole proprietorship doesn't is liability protection. And that's one of the things that people are always concerned about is liability protection. I don't want my business to impede on my personal assets. And how do we keep that distinction? Sole proprietorship, there's no differentiation. Okay. And that's part of the reason why you might see it for a consultant or a trainer, because even if they had an entity, they're still going to potentially be liable because they're the ones performing or providing the service. And so sometimes going through the entity formation just isn't for them. But in my opinion, most people can benefit from having and creating and maintaining an LLC.
Okay. That is amazing information, because those are one of the things that confuse me. I try to say, what is the benefit to having each? How do I know which one to, start from? And not me personally, just kind of answering out to the audience, but, saying, hey, if this is the type of business I have, like a trainer, what is going to be the best option for me? Now, when you're operating, for yourself in the business, so when someone is choosing, what entity to operate under, what are the disadvantages of each of the ones that you just explained, like the S Corp? And
so there are, with anything, right? We always say there's no free lunch, right? There's going to be an advantage and there's going to be a disadvantage, no matter what path you choose. There's going to be pros and cons. With an LLC, one of the reasons it's the most popular is because, generally speaking, it has the least amount of maintenance. Okay. So when you form an LLC in Arizona specifically, then there's no annual filing that's required at the state level to maintain that entity.
Okay.
If instead you were to form a corporation, then there are annual reporting requirements at the state level. It varies from state to state, so I'm using Arizona as an example. But if you formed your entity in a different state, then that may not be the same in that particular state. And so looking at all of those things before you get started can be really important to knowing, okay, I'm going to have to maintain this, because if you don't, then there are potential consequences to that, like administrative dissolution, where your entity is dissolved by the state because you have failed to maintain it. And so you really want to be aware of what you're getting into at the start.
All right. This is really great information. So I just want to kind of go back for a second on the S Corp. Sure. Just for my own curiosity, in case someone else is curious, because I don't really hear too much about the S corps, because I feel like it's always the LLC. What type of business do you see that would set up an S corp, just as an example?
So an S corp, any LLC that sets up as an LLC should consult with their CPA about whether making the S corp election is the right thing for them to do from a tax perspective, because it's a tax implication. So the challenge is, if you make that S election, while it doesn't change your structure, you're still an LLC, right? So you're still an LLC entity, you're taxed as an S corp, or you're still a corporation, but you're taxed as an S corp. And so whether that's going to benefit you from a tax perspective is definitely something that you want to talk with your CPA, your accountant, about, to make sure that that's the right move. Because what happens is, if you make that election, then you are limited in the number and type of owners that you can have in your structure, whatever that is. So it's something that usually works out well when people have achieved a certain amount of success in the business, because of the tax benefits that you can achieve with an S corp that you can't necessarily with some of the other tax options. But there's no right or wrong. Sometimes it makes sense to just make that election right out of the gate. And so it's something that is very fact specific, and based on the facts and circumstances of the particular client and their needs.
Great information. So tax implications, that's what it's about. See, I'm learning something, because I literally, my head, like I said, I try to research and I try to follow along. And then, like you were saying earlier, you read something and it brings you to something else. And now I'm reading on this. And then I just feel like I'm all over the place. And I say, this is too much information. So I definitely see the importance of, finding an expert, an attorney, to figure out which, one is going to go great with your business that you should, consult about. So
yeah, it's not at all unusual for someone to come in and say, I want to create an S corp.
Okay.
And then we have to go back a step and say, okay, when you say S corp, do you mean LLC taxed as an S corp, or do you mean corporation taxed as an S corp? Okay. And so one of the reasons why LLCs are so popular is because you do have that flexibility. For LLCs, single member LLCs, the default is going to be a disregarded entity. So LLCs and S corps, we'll just use S corps because it's easier. Okay. LLCs and S corps are pass through entities. So from a tax perspective, there's no tax due at the entity level.
Okay.
In a C corp, there's tax due at the entity level, and then there's tax due again when distributions are made to the shareholders. For LLCs and S corps, it's pass through taxation, meaning it just kind of comes through to the individual owners. In the LLC, if you don't elect an S corp, if you don't do an S election, then, and you're a single member, your default taxation will be a disregarded entity. So the entity itself is still there. The liability protection is still there. For tax purposes, though, the IRS disregards the entity as separate for tax purposes. If you have more than one member of your LLC, then your default taxation will be partnership.
Okay.
And then you have a certain period of time after you set up the LLC to make the S election. You do not want to miss that window if you could benefit from that S election in the tax year. Although you can file late. I leave that up to the CPAs. But there are things that you want to know and have planned out each of those steps before you get started, because there are windows of time in which to accomplish certain things.
Okay. So one question that I have, going back to the LLC, if they do not choose like a tax implication, and I think you said that the IRS I think you said disregard, or was the word you could use?
It will default. Yeah,
default.
you get
so
a
what
default
exactly
tax.
does that mean? Oh, okay. So you said, sorry, I'll let you answer that
yeah,
part.
No, that's
I'm
fine.
digesting all of this great information.
I know. I'm trying. I want to make it digestible. That's always my goal,
You're doing great.
right? I want to make it digestible. But it does. You can get in the weeds very quickly. And so it just means that if you don't make a different election, it's the default.
Okay.
So if it's basically decided for you, unless you make unless you choose a different option, this would be the default unless you make that choice.
See, I love it. Okay. All right. I'm following.
Okay.
I'm following.
Great.
All right. All right. So I think we're gonna move over to choosing the right formation. So how does I think we kind of touched on the liability protection a little bit earlier, but how does liability protection differ among various business structures?
Sure. So sole proprietorship, there's no liability protection. Okay. Everything is fair game. In partnerships, depending on the type of partnership that you've formed, there may or may not be some liability exposure for one or more of the partners. Now, a partnership, you can only form if you have two people or more.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Sole proprietorship is just one. Partnership, two or more. LLCs and corporations, whether or not taxed as an S corp, can have one or more owners. The LLC structure and the corporation structure build in liability protection from the jump. So creating the entity creates the possibility of separating your personal assets from your business assets, separating your personal liabilities from your business liabilities. Okay. But what people need to be aware of is if you are personally responsible for whatever the issue is, the entity will not protect you under those circumstances. But like if you have an employee, for example, and that employee does something negligent and you were not negligent in hiring that employee or supervising that employee, then you should be protected. The other thing that people should consider just as a part of all of this is proper insurance. Insurance
That's going to be one of the questions.
is really, really helpful for that. But what people need to be mindful of with the liability protection, it comes from the fact that you have gone through the effort to create a separate entity, to hold this separate entity out as the business, the provider of the service, the provider of the products. But if you don't maintain the formality between those two, and you treat the entity like what's known as an alter ego, okay, so you don't open a bank account for that company, all the money's going into your personal account, or you do open a bank account, but you just pay your personal expenses out of the business. You don't maintain the divide between those two entities, then you risk your liability protection.
Right. And the liability protection is not the same as just getting insurance for the business. Okay.
Liability. So if you think of it, I like to, people are generally familiar with the idea of piercing the corporate veil. Okay. It's kind of this like old school term that's like, what does that mean? But the idea is this line between the business and you, it's not a wall. It's a veil. And if you think of each of these things, I like to think of it as like layered curtains.
Okay.
Right? You know, if you go to a hotel, they've got that sheer one that kind of lets the sunlight in, and then they've got like the room darkening shades. You have like all those different things. So the more of those things that you layer, the stronger your protection is. And insurance is one of those things that you can layer. You can layer in the insurance to make sure that you have some adequate protection for the things that might go sideways in your business.
I like that. I really like that. So that just explains it nice and simple. So, because I know for me, the reason I kind of asked that question is I'm learning so much from you right now. So if you see me over here just tuned in, I'm like, I finally get it. It's clicking now. So, but yeah, I didn't know that there was a difference between, you know, the liability protection and the insurance. And those are two separate things. So you just want to make sure that's why I said there's so much to setting yourself up correctly, you know, with the business. And I'm pretty sure there's, you know, instances where people are setting up and then they're having to go back and change or make updates, or they're learning along the way. But it sounds like it can also go places that you don't want it to go if you're not, you know, doing it correctly, especially when it comes to just like you were kind of mentioning the expenses. And because I know I don't know how important, and I'm thinking of my own self again. I had a youth program I had started some years back, and I did that for a couple of years before closing. But there were certain things that I didn't do because I didn't have the proper knowledge. And one of them were just even the expenses and just fees that were coming in, and I was still using my own bank account. And I was like, no, I don't know if that's right. Like I probably shouldn't do that. So I think that's very important that you kind of brought that up too.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to form a business, treat it like a business. You have to really operate in a professional and differentiated manner in order to get the benefit of the entity that you've chosen. And so I think it's something that you can make missteps. Everybody does, right? No one is perfect. There are going to be errors, mistakes, those types of things. And a lot of them can be dealt with. A lot of them can be managed. You can change, like you said. You can even go so far as to convert your entity to a different type of entity. You can move your entity to another state if you decide that that's what's right for you. And those are things that you won't necessarily know the day that you form. Yep. And you might bring on a business partner who wants certain things or has some differences of opinion about what should happen or how it should be structured. So there are lots of options as you grow, as you develop, things you can layer in, things you can take out. But setting the good foundation.
Yes.
I'm all about foundation.
You have to have the strong foundation. It's just like building a house. Like you everything else will come, on top of that as you're building, but you have to have that foundation. So,
exactly.
So it's really good. So that's why I really think it's important, out there to just make sure you're either doing your research when it comes to, setting this up or, finding an expert, an attorney. And I know things can get expensive. So you just may have to do a little bit more research out there, but it's definitely important, just because you want to be successful, you want to do it right. And you actually said something that I was going to comment on earlier.
Okay.
So it's great to bring this up right now, but it's probably like a really simple question, but if I do have a business, let's say I have a business and I'm operating in Arizona, but I take this business and I'm going to California with it. Now I still live in Arizona. I still have my business in Arizona. Do I have to set up another, a new formation in California for the same business?
So there may be circumstances where that's what you would want to do, but you don't have to do that. But you do need to consult with that state's law because you may be required to register your Arizona business in California. Okay. So you keep and maintain your Arizona. It's your home base. It's not a separate company, but you basically let the state know that your Arizona company is doing business in California, or any other state for that matter, but using California as your example. And so it's known as a foreign registration. Okay. And it depends on whether we think of generally foreign as outside of the United States. But in this context, it just means between two different states. Okay. But there might be a circumstance where if you're going to offer a different type of business service, or it's not related to the business that you're doing in the other state, it may make the most sense to just have a separate company, because again, it's all about separating the liabilities from the assets. You don't necessarily want all of your business assets pooled into a place where liabilities from different places can gain access to those assets.
Right. Okay. Well, that definitely makes sense. So I appreciate you breaking that down and just explaining that, because there really is a lot of differences with setting this up. So
yes. And there's a lot of differences from state to state. Sometimes so for example, there are states where you can form your entity where you don't have to make the ownership a matter of public record. Okay. So if someone goes and looks, they can't see, oh, you own this business. But what people don't understand is if that company is then specifically going to operate in another state, they may be required to do a foreign registration that requires them to disclose all of that information. Right. So if you are going to layer, it may require layering a couple of entities, and we're getting a little bit into a little bit more of a complicated structure. That might make sense for people, even if they don't have a complicated business. Maybe we're dealing with rental real estate and those types of things. And that's not necessarily offering a business or service or products or anything like that, but you're renting out real estate. Those types of layered structures start to make sense.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. That sounds like it's a great question, and I appreciate that feedback you give, because there's just so much to it.
It's a really good question. It's a really good question because people often can have a misstep by taking a business and operating in another state without the proper permission.
Right.
And so you don't want to find yourself, technically most states have fines and things of that nature that apply if you haven't registered and were supposed to. I not seen it enforced specifically necessarily, but it can create problems if, for example, you need to take advantage of the court system in that particular state. You won't be able to do that unless and until you're registered. So those are things to consider as well.
Yeah. So to my friend watching, because I know you asked me that question, because she has a business in one state and she was trying to operate it. She's moving to another state, but she was trying to keep it active in one. And she asked me like, what? I was like, I don't know. So this episode is for you.
Well, and under those circumstances, conversion may make the most sense, converting it to the local. And so she really should consult with her own attorney on that, because it might make sense to not maintain the home base in Arizona. But that's all something to be considered.
And I think this is really great too, because I feel like the information you're providing is really great. And it also, because again, I'm a person who likes to do research. And so I think that this hopefully is a good start, for people out there. And it's like, okay, this is a good start. This is, she's breaking it down. This is what I should do. And then it's up to you to really take that information and, do more research, build upon it for your business, what's right for you, and just kind of go with what's the best plan for yourself. So
yes. Yeah, exactly. We're talking general information here that may or may not apply to your unique set of facts and circumstances. And so it really is important to have a counsel for your specific needs.
Yep, that's how you got to do. You got to do the work.
Yes, yes.
So I appreciate that. All right, so we're going to get into the legal and operational considerations, and I just kind of had a question around this. But what are some common mistakes business owners make when choosing a business structure, and how can they avoid them, or just anything that you've maybe seen just in your past, or something that's kind of a common situation that happens?
So one of the things that I think people, the thing that I see as the mistake that people are more inclined to make is the idea that they're going into business with another person who they admire, who they may be friends with, who they may consider closer than some of their family members, and they don't consider how that relationship could go sideways, right? People have prenups for marriages. You're merging these financial households together. You might enter into a prenuptial agreement. Well, getting the right agreement between owners of a company before there's an issue is so much easier than when there's a fight or a disagreement. Right. Arizona law changed a couple of years ago where we now have a much more robust LLC default. Our statutes have a lot of defaults for if people don't create an operating agreement, which we didn't historically have until a couple of years ago. And so people need to be aware that if you don't do this, it does not mean that you don't have these things that are going to govern and control the relationship in a way that isn't necessarily what you thought going in. And so it is really, really important to document, how are we owning this company together? What's your ownership interest? What's my ownership interest? What's the expectation of putting money into the company on a regular basis? What happens if one of us wants out? How do we deal with that? What if I want to sell? Can I sell it to whomever I want? And now you're in business with some random third party because I didn't want to be in business with you anymore. Those are the things that if you talk about that while everything is still hearts and flowers and everybody's getting along and excited, it is going to be
easier.
Yes. And what people need to understand too is when we're creating these documents, we're creating the floor. Okay, again, kind of like the foundation, but now we're creating the floor. You can always agree later to something different than the floor, but if you can't agree, there's a baseline.
Right.
There's a floor for you guys to land on that you guys at one point agreed was the way you wanted to deal with it.
Yep. And I like that too. So, and the reason I was saying I like that is because I don't think of that either. I haven't had a business where I can go in with someone, but that's something that's probably like you're so excited about the business, you're so excited to start with this person, you guys are close, that you really don't think of, you could grow apart. They can have another venture, you could have another venture, down the future, and it's like, okay, what do we do? So with the Arizona, I think you were saying there was a new statute with Arizona, if I'm saying that right. When you say default, does that just mean that if something were to happen and because you didn't have anything in place with that partner, Arizona's going to choose for you, you know, and the partner, what, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it has fiduciary duties that may apply between the members. So a fiduciary is, think of the person in a fiduciary position is in a position of trust. And so you have certain things that you're supposed to be doing for one another in this position of trust of being in this business together. And so there are things that you can waive in an agreement, but if you don't, then it might apply. You could draft around a lot of the provisions of the statute, which people often want to do. But if you don't, that's what's going to apply. The same is true for estate plans. If you don't create an estate plan, it doesn't mean that there isn't one for you. There's all sorts of provisions in our statutes that say what happens if you haven't said otherwise. Now, there are also provisions of the statute that you can't draft around. So again, that's why it's important to either have done an extensive amount of research or work with a trusted advisor to know that you can't actually put that in your operating agreement. So those are the things. Operating agreement for LLC. So just a little definitions.
Okay.
Operating agreement is the management agreement for an LLC. Okay. And then if you have a corporation, then you may have bylaws or a shareholder agreement.
I love it. I'm like really excited. This is really great information. I feel like I'm really learning so much, and the way you're explaining it, it really breaks it down, because some people's brains, you know, some people can pick up with things and they can take it and run off. And other people, they need it just broken down a little bit more. I'm one of those people. I'm like, just break it down a little bit more and I can take off running with it. But this is really great information, because it's just so much more than, you know, saying I have a business, slapping a name on it, and then you're ready to go, you know, and it's like there's so much more behind that. So
yeah, and if you're a single member, if you're in an LLC, again, definitionally, members in LLCs, partners in partnerships, and shareholders in corporations. Okay, and then in an LLC, you may choose to have it be member managed, or you might choose to have it be manager managed. Those are different things that can happen. The managers and the members, depending on the structure, serve similar roles to directors, officers, and shareholders of corporations. But it's just different words to describe based on the type of entity.
So that's actually another great point, because even myself, going through online, and when you're setting up a LLC, or you're setting it up, and I'm talking about for a single member, when it's asked the question online when you're registering your business, if you're a member, or if there's, I think, a member or managed, can that be you yourself, or does that have to be someone else?
If you're in an LLC?
Yes.
It can totally be you.
Okay.
You can serve in all the roles. In every state, for example, you're required to have either what's known as a registered agent or a statutory agent in the state. And the goal of that person, or the sole purpose of that person, is to be able to accept legal paperwork on behalf of the company. Now, people read that and they think, oh, it's legal paperwork, I have to have somebody to fill that role. Not necessarily. You can fill that role yourself if you're comfortable with it. But if you don't have an address, you don't have a presence in the state. So like, for example, if you were going to form an entity in another state, you probably can't serve as the statutory agent there because you don't have a presence or an address in that state. And so then you might need to hire a third party to do that. And there are companies that do that. That's all that they do. There are companies, that's all that they do. And they charge an annual fee, but it can be nominal. Expense is relative, right? But it's usually a fairly nominal fee if you're starting a business, under a couple $100. So members and managers, again, it can also be you. But if you have created a member managed entity, you don't necessarily want to use the title of manager. It can confuse things, and vice versa. So being specific and being detailed in how you're operating, it can be meaningful. It can make a difference.
So if you are a single member, person operating your business, you can be all of those things. I just want to make sure that's very clear. So you can be a member, it can be member managed, it can be, you can have the papers come to your address. So,
right.
Okay.
Yes. Right. Yes. They just want to make sure that they know who they need to address.
I like what you said earlier too, though, and that's something like think a lot of people could hear in the beginning, you know, when opening a business, if you're going to open a business, treat it like a business.
Yeah.
And so it's just making yourself knowledgeable, aware, like really taking care of your business. And, you know, so I really like that you had said that earlier.
Yeah. And sometimes it's exactly why sometimes people will come to form the business for that particular purpose, which is that they want to appear professional. They want to appear like they are someone that another business should put their faith and trust into that person. And so, so operating it appropriately is important.
This I think this was a really good question. So how can business owners or, you know, aspiring business owners find a qualified attorney or advisor to help with their business formation? Like, what are ways they can?
So the vast majority of my clients come to me by referral. So ask your trusted friends, ask your network of people that you already know, that you've already established some trust with, because if they trust the person or they had a good experience with the person, then it's more likely that you will also have a good experience with that person, and it kind of helps break break down that barrier to trust. Because one of the things that's really important for me is when I'm talking with clients, I need you to disclose a lot of uncomfortable information to me in a very short amount of time. And so that's word of mouth and referrals are a really, really great option. If you don't have that trusted network, or maybe, you know, you're wanting to try something and you don't want your core group to know because you want an opportunity to be successful before you put it out there, then you can look at other resources. Like you can call the State Bar Association or the County Bar Association. They will often have referral options, and you can also look on the website for any lawyer. You can look up any lawyer there. So that's a good option. And then there are other things that are resources that attorneys invest in for marketing purposes, and you can look at some of those where they're kind of aggregators of online resources. The referral, I think you're going to get the cleanest referral, the direct referral, and then the state bars are another good option, and then doing some online research is another good option.
I agree with that. I'm like, definitely the online research and see where it brings you. And, you know, just with the online research, I see that it tends to bring me one place and another, and that's where you can get overwhelmed. But so I agree with you that, you know, the most trusted one could be, you know, any referrals. So if you are in Arizona, you can definitely look Stephanie up.
Thank you.
I really, just really great that you provided like all of this information. So do you only operate like for Arizona, or like do you help others who don't live in Arizona?
So I'm technically licensed in Washington and Arizona, which means that the vast majority of my clients are going to be in Arizona. If their matter relates to Arizona, I may be able to assist them, but I'm not necessarily going to be able to help someone who lives in another state. Everything that they have is in another state. But from Arizona, we may choose an entity type that's not within Arizona. But based on licensing, I'm licensed in Arizona and Washington.
Well, I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you. Me too. I love Arizona.
Yes, me too. It's hot, but I love it.
It's hot.
So just personal insights and advice, just kind of as we get to the end of this, two questions I've been wanting to ask you. So what has been the most rewarding part of your career in law?
So I love that I get to build things. I get to help people through some of the more stressful periods of their life. And I'm honored by the trust that they put in me to help them with that. And so it's really rewarding to me because people come in, they've thought about doing something, they've gone and done their research, they've tried so hard to figure it out on their own, and you know, they just kind of get stuck. And so then they come in and maybe they're a little bit frustrated or a little overwhelmed. And so being able to take that away, especially when someone's starting a business, you're going to start a business because you're amazing at the business that you do. Focus on that.
Right.
Let me handle this piece. You know, it really is I think more affordable than people think. Depending on a lot of different factors, but I think it is more affordable than people think, and something that can really help long term. And so that to me is really rewarding, to kind of launch people with the things that they need that had them either stuck or stressed, and to take that away.
I like that also because I agree. I think when people hear the word attorney and, laws, and it sounds like, okay, oh my goodness, that's going to be so expensive. But I also am someone where I think I've said that in the other interviews that I've done, is the support is like what matters. So, and I love how you stated that, this is what you do. So you do this with your business. And sometimes you have to hand the rest of it over to the experts. You have to hand it over. I think that it'll be less overwhelming. You'll understand more. And also with a consultation. So do you offer, consultations?
So we do consultations. So I have the structure, though, they are paid consultations, because the person is going to walk out with all of the information that they need. They can go do it themselves when they leave if they want to. Right. But if they retain us, then it essentially gets rolled into the overall price that we discuss. So I contemplate that as part of the overall package of services. And it just kind of depends. If someone wants a meet and greet because they just want to know if they like me, do they like me? Do I know what they need?
Right.
Can I really help them? Because I can tell you right now, if someone came into me on a paid consultation and they come in and I was like, I don't do that, right? I'm not going to keep their consultation fee.
Right.
But because of the nature of the work and the fact that I can only be focused on that, I can't be doing something else. There's no product necessarily that's going out the door. I have to be careful to value that time. And I find that it works out really nicely with clients, because then they're invested in the process as well, and they see the value of it. So the goal is you're going to get an hour's worth of information, of quality information, and you're going to receive value. But if you want to meet and greet because you want to make sure I know how to do what you're doing, I'll schedule a 10-minute complimentary call to just say, here's who I am and here's what I can do.
But I'm that person. I'm like, can I meet you first, just to see how we
Yeah, totally. I get it.
But I also, even with the consultation and it being paid, sometimes that's just an investment in yourself also. It's an investment in your business, yourself. But for me, if this is the type of value that I got from sitting here doing this interview with you, then I know I would probably say, hey, what is that fee? I'll have to try to make it work. So, and then also, I guess another question that I want to ask is, if someone, they're overwhelmed or they just have a lot of questions, it's all jumbled in their mind. And this is just for here in Arizona or just any attorney. So if they're coming, down here to Keller Rohrback. I got that Rohrback. I'm going to be a pro at this. Yes. So if they're coming in here, what are some questions that you think that they could maybe list or ask themselves that they should ask when seeking, an attorney, if the attorney is right for them?
So if they're interviewing the attorney, or if they're interviewing or asking for their consultation, like what should they be prepared to answer for the consultation, or interviewing the attorney?
So for me, if I'm someone, because let's say I don't know this process, it's a lot, it's too much, and I'm saying, hey, I want to talk to someone who's an expert in this field. And for me, when I seek someone out, I feel like the interview goes both ways to see if we work for each other. Totally. So what questions do you think would help them say, what can I ask the attorney to see if they are right for me?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the most important part is, like we talked about a little bit earlier, expense is relative, right? So something that may be inexpensive to one person is going to be wildly expensive to another person. So understand their billing rate. Why is their billing rate what their billing rate is, right? Because a 2-year attorney is not going to have the same billing rate as a 20-year attorney, right? So those are things. Do they have the ability to scale? So is there someone that maybe they can work on their matter in the same office, but at a lower rate? Is there someone experienced enough to do that at a lower rate? How is the fee structured? Is it a flat fee? Is it hourly? Do you provide estimates? Is there a deposit, right? And all of those things obviously relate to money, but that can be the elephant in the room in a lot of discussions. And so being really clear on that and understanding that is wildly important. to the overall
like
process.
that, because it also gives the the person out there opportunity to know these are the questions that we know that you're probably going to think of as a client. So it's okay to ask us that.
Yes. Well, because money's taboo, right? It's a taboo topic. People are like, oh, you don't talk about money, right? But if I'm going to sticker shock you at the end of a meeting, it's better to have that discussion up front. And it's also good to set expectations, right? Also, how long does the process take? How accessible are you? Are you an email person? Are you a phone person? Can I text you? These are all things that you want to make sure that you've set.
Exactly.
Because some people are exclusively email people. Some people are exclusively phone people. Some people are like, oh my gosh, if you call me on the phone, I am going to like, their voicemail's not set up and it's full, right? Like, or it's full. So those things are all really important. You know, how much access will they have to you? What's your experience with what's the attorney's experience with the matter that you're asking them to handle? Are they going to do the work, or is somebody else going to do the work? And all of those things.
I love it. That is really great. When I say I really love that, because it gives people the comfort to be able to say you can ask these questions.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you don't have to go in and I think some people are just like, it's too much, and I feel like this is what they offer. Nope. You got to interview too. You have to interview and make sure that they're right for you. So thank you for sharing those tips. I really appreciate it.
Well, and it's something too that as you mature in life, things become a little bit more comfortable because you've had it not go the way that it should have, right? And so it's not unusual for me to sit in a room with someone and I can tell based on experience that they're experiencing sticker shock, but they don't want me to necessarily know that there's a sticker shock because maybe they feel embarrassed about that. There's no reason to be embarrassed about it, right? We want to provide a service that's meaningful and provides the proper value. And if we're not the right person for it, we may be able to refer you somewhere else. We may be able, there are things you can do. These are things you can set up yourself. You don't have to hire an attorney to do it. You don't have to. But economies of scale and time, if it's going to take you 10, 15, 20 hours to sort through it and figure it out yourself, figure out what your rate is. What would you normally make per hour for those hours? If that's what it's going to cost you to hire an attorney with some confidence that it will be done properly, then it may make good financial sense.
That's really great. And I think, like I said, that just sets someone up to feel comfortable. I'm that person. So I'll come in and I'm like, hey, let's get these questions out the way. So
I tell people all the time, like if I walk into a store and I see like a coat that I have to have, like there was this pink coat that I just had to have, right? But I'm going to walk over, I'm going to set in my mind, how much am I willing to pay for that coat? And then the first thing I'm going to do is pull out that tag. And is it plus or minus what I was willing to pay for it? And sometimes, you stock the coat online for a while until it goes on sale. And so those are things that, yes, we're all consumers. The attorneys are consumers too. We also get that we're not the least expensive professionals. And so it's something that we're very accustomed to talking about, and it shouldn't be any sort of shame or hesitation to talking about it with your attorney. It should be first and foremost.
I appreciate it. So I have one fun question that I was also waiting for. So, well, to me, it's fun. How do you balance the demands of your legal career with your personal life and children?
Not well. No, it's so the biggest challenge with my profession is I can technically do my job anywhere at any time. So I could technically be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And there are people that have the expectation that I should do that. And so for me, it's about finding the right clients who also value family. I had my children first. That was something that was important to me. And so I had to pick some practice areas that provided some flexibility for me to be the parent that I wanted to be. And so for me, I sometimes struggle with the idea of balance, because balance applies equilibrium, right? It applies that it's always just like this. And there are times it's not But on an overall basis, it has provided me some of the flexibility that I've needed in my life and in my career to be the type of parent, spouse, child, sister, all of those things that I want to be.
Everything.
Yes, it's a lot. It's a lot. But I wouldn't trade any of it. I love all of it. But there are times I feel like I'm not balanced at all. And then there are times that I feel that it gives me the exact flexibility that I need.
Okay, and I'm going to do one more follow-up question to that. So how do you find the balance whenever you do find, how it's time to have that time for family? And I know work can be demanding. Just for any aspiring, there might be someone who's trying to go to school for law or, just something out there. What advice could you give, or how would you say, do you find the balance? How do you find it?
I think you have to be willing to set boundaries, understanding that the boundaries that you set may block opportunities.
Yep, that's actually very true.
And that it's something that you have to be willing to say, this is more important to me. And if this person cannot, or this organization or whatever it is, cannot understand or appreciate or respect those boundaries, then this is a choice that I have to make for me and for my family. And a different opportunity will present itself that will be a better fit for me. So don't sacrifice yourself or the things that you know are important to you to fit into a mold that you know doesn't serve that purpose.
Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate you for sharing and just the information. And I think this was a very, very informative session. So I hope that you took some notes out there. I hope it was really inspiring for someone out there. I know I learned a lot of knowledge today. I really have. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, wow. And you answered a lot of questions for me that I've had. So I just want to say thank you again, for just taking this interview, being able to share with the viewers out there. And I really, really hope that someone is inspired and has a better understanding of how, forming the business entities work. So
thank you. I hope that's the case too. Yes. I want people to get it. I want people to get it.
You did great.
I always tell people, you don't have to remember. You don't have to remember in 10 years why we did what we did, but I want you to feel confident that the day that we decided, you understood the why.
Yep. All right. So thank you so much. So again, this is Stephanie Fierro, and I really appreciate your time sharing out there. So again, make sure that you go back. You can replay this. You can take the notes, and it's just a very special segment. So I'm very excited about it. So until next time, we'll talk to everyone later.